Hello, in this next tutorial for class I'm going to be showing you how to do some basic animation techniques so you'll get a result similar to what I have on the screen here with this bending pipe. There will be a lab that's actually very similar to something like this that you'll be coming across fairly soon as well, or if we've already done it then this will be some extra practice and a reference to go back to the techniques that you would have used. So we're going to start with a new file. Hit new and discard my changes. Again, with the default scene, as we've done before, I'm going to hit A to select all and then press delete to get rid of everything on the screen. Now I'm going to introduce you to a few animation properties before we jump into the tube. So for now, I'm just going to add a cube, and we're going to start by animating this. Now, at the top of the screen, as I mentioned before, you have these different tabs for different layouts. In this case, I am going to open up the animation tab, and instead of having the second object window open over here, I'm going to change this to the graph editor. So, at the bottom of the screen down here, we have what's called the dope sheet. This is where animation data is stored for different objects. If we go back to regular layout at the top, you can see there's a similar bar at the bottom here. However, this one's the timeline. It's slightly different. This one tracks overall progression through the scene, whereas the dope sheet is for the different animations that an object might have. So if we go into the animation window, you can see that this is a scaling bar that goes in line with the graph editor above. So the frame count is at the top, and the frame count is here on the dope sheet. So when I select the cube, I'm going to open up my toolbar here, and I press I, this brings up a menu of the different types of keyframes that we can put on an object in the scene. So I'm going to put a location rotation scale 1 on, which will then save animation data for that frame, for the location, the rotation, and the scale of that object. So you can see on the dope sheet in the timeline we had a few updates. If we open this up, you can see there is a point here for every single of those item in that location rotation scale. So we have 9 different animation points. Now, if I scrub this ahead to, we'll go with 30, and then I update my scene to move this guy over here, and hit I again, and hit location rotation scale, it will then save that data for those 9 points as well there. You can see the graph editor updated as well with some lines. So these correspond to these down here. And you can see because the only thing that I actually did change was my Y location. That's the only one that is different, which is this green line here. Everything else remained the same. If I, for say, scaled it as well, so we'll jump back with this back button here, brings us back to the beginning, and I scale this down and do location rotation scale again. Now you can see that this blue line is updated here with the Z scale. So if I select that, you can see that highlighted that line. So now when we play, you can see it gets bigger and it moves. You can see that the animation isn't looping over and over, and the timeline continues to move. That's because the end is set to 250 here. I want a 60 frame animation, so I'm going to set this to 60. Now, if I wanted it to move back so that this cycles, I can select all here. I should be able to paste all. Oh, I apologize, that only works with poses, and we're not working with poses quite yet. So disregard what I just said. So if I did want to move this back, though, I could go into my Properties window and look at what my scale is here, which is 0.481. And we're just going to go to frame 60. I'm going to drag this guy back to the start. There we go. and then these were 0.481. So you can put these values in directly over here. 0.481, there we go. And then if I hit I and do location rotation scale again, you can see it move back. So now if I play my animation, it loops very nicely. On our graph editor here, you can see that these are Bezier handles. So this essentially means that we can change the fluidity of this movement. So if you right-click on a point, you can drag it around. So you can see now things are starting to look a little bit different with these handles. I'm going to bring that back to the middle there. And then right-click on one of the handles and you can drag this so that you can manipulate the curve. Like that. So you can see that this is doing some weird unexpected results. So I wouldn't suggest playing with it too much, but if you do have some fluidity that you want to try and tweak, you can move your Bezier handles around. This is also nice in real time if I wanted to just see how this would look if I moved it further away. There you can see, or closer like that. So, if we wanted this to be a smooth linear motion instead of a Bezier motion, we could select our entire Y location and go to Key, and then under the Key menu there's something called Interpolation mode. So the interpolation is what happens between frames. So we've currently set 3 keyframes at 0, 30, and 60. The interpolation is the math that goes into determining what the points in between 0 and 30 and 30 and 60 are going to be. If we want this to be a linear motion instead of a Bezier motion, we can just hit linear, and that should change that for us. Except for some reason it's not changing all of it, which is... We'll just select everything. So I just hit A to select all, and we'll just do interpolation. There we go. So now everything is linear. And you can see that has changed my animation a bit. This doesn't look quite as realistic in motion as we talked about in class. This would be for something mechanical. Now, even mechanical things do have a slight bit of acceleration on them. However, a lot of times, if you want something spinning at a constant speed, you don't want to have a Bezier curve on that, so you'd want to use the linear interpolation mode. If I wanted this to continually move on forever and ever, I could go into my channel and do cyclic extrapolation. So you can see now that this copied and just extrapolated that out. So if I moved this to 90 instead of 60, now it won't be fluid anymore. You can see because it's a 90-second or 90-frame animation, but it's not completing a cycle. So this is a way that you can make things spin forever, or make something move off in a specific direction forever if you wanted that too. I'm going to undo that and bring that back just like that with Control-Z. So that goes over the graph editor and the dope sheet. And if we go back to our layout mode, you can see that it has updated with a few points on our timeline down here. So this is nice to know as well. In the keying set, you can go up here and select a type of key that you want. So then when you hit I, it'll automatically go to that one. So if I select location, rotation, scale in my keying set, which is active here, you can press X to remove it if you need. That will be my new starting point now. So I just hit I, as you can see down here, successfully added 9 keyframes, but I didn't have to open up that menu. I'm going to undo a few times. So those are the basics of animation. Now, keep in mind that you can also animate anything that you want. You don't have to stick to location, rotation, scale. If it is a field anywhere in here, including a color field, you can insert a keyframe. So you can keyframe the RGB values, and you can change those over time. You can keyframe the specular value. You can keyframe modifier values. If we wanted to have, you know, an edge split, you can keyframe this angle so that it changes over time. So don't feel like you need to only work with location, rotation, and scale. Although those are the most common, everything in Blender is essentially keyframeable. You can even keyframe the visibility, or at least you used to be able to. You might not be able to anymore. You used to be able to keyframe the visibility of an object in a scene through the hierarchy, but it may not be there anymore, so don't worry about that. Alright, moving on to the tube, I'm going to delete this and add a cylinder in. And I'm just going to hit S for scale, and we're going to do it on the Z, and we'll just hit 5, like that, so we have a little bit longer. Now, like I do with a lot of objects to give them the proper smooth edges, I'm going to shade this smooth under the Object menu, and apply an edge split modifier so that it properly shades the object there, as you can see. Alright. If you click up here on any of these handles, this is the Y direction, we're going to go with the X. This will show you the front view of your scene with the X. And then if I go into View and hit Perspective Orthographic, or 5 on the numpad, this will bring me into orthographic, so I'm looking straight on with my object. A lot of times when animating, you may want to get from a specific angle like this so you can properly move what you're trying to do or place an object exactly where you want it to go. What I'm going to do is add an armature. Okay, so this is how we're going to get bones to an object, to a structure. You can see that nothing really happened when I did that. If you select this up here, X-ray mode, you can see there is a small bone inside of there. Now there's another way to do this that's a little easier. If we go down here to the animation context window, and we go to the viewport display, if we hit in front, you can see that now, from whatever angle I'm looking at, this bone is always visible. Even though it's still in the center of the object, I can see it from any angle, so I can select it, like that. If we go into edit mode, this is editing the armature overall. This is a lot like just manipulating other objects. The only thing you have to keep in mind is that this is an entire bone and this is a joint. When we add bones, we essentially extrude them from joints. So if you select this joint and hit E to extrude, and then you can place it anywhere you want. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that because I'm going to show you how to get this exact. First off, I'm going to drag this up. Now, you can see that the bone scales in size compared to how big it is. This doesn't matter. If it's sticking out like this, it honestly does not matter. The bones are not visible within the scene when you render it, so don't worry about how big they are. I'm just going to bring it to about here. I'm going to hit E again to extrude, but this time I'm going to right-click, and you can see that nothing really happened. It did extrude it, but it extruded it at 0, so now I can just drag that extrusion out. And now I have an exact bone that's in line with the other. Now what I'm going to do is go back to object mode and drag my entire skeleton down. Go back into edit mode, and I'm going to extrude this 2 more times using the same exact method I did before. So now I have 4 bones within my cylinder. If you go into pose mode, you can start moving these around by selecting one and then rotating or translating or doing whatever you need. You can see that it does what you'd expect, where the 2 bones follow each other. And if I turn this one a bit, you can see that it all works out as expected. You can see it's not moving the tube, however. This may be a problem, right? So we're going to go into object mode, select our cylinder, then select the skeleton, and press Control P. This brings up our parenting menu. Now, there's a lot of different methods in here, and if you want to have a lot of control over this, we can go over in class how to draw weight paints. It's a very tedious process, however, you have a lot of control over where your bones are actually controlling the mesh they're attached to. In this case, I'm just going to suggest that you use what's called automatic weights, and this will then parent our cylinder to the armature. So now if I move my armature, you can see that the cylinder moves with it. This will also work when we go into pose mode on the armature and start rotating. Now, this isn't doing what we expect. This is really strange looking, isn't it? If you ever get results like this, where it's not really doing what you expect, this is probably because you need to subdivide your surface. So I'm going to go back into object mode and select my cylinder, and you can see that there's only points at the bottom and the top, these two circles here. When poses are developed, it's manipulating the vertices of the geometry. So we need to give this much more geometry to work with, essentially. So I'm going to do Control R and just put a bunch of ring cuts in here like this with the scroll wheel, click, and then right click like that. Now if I go back into object mode, select my armature, hit pose mode, this is a little bit more what we're expecting, isn't it? Still not quite right, but it's closer. And this is what automatic weights can do for you. If you wanted to have a lot more control over this, like I said, you could do weight paint. And I suppose I could show you how to do that. So if we go into object mode, select our cylinder, and hit weight paint mode, you can see it's got these different colors on it. So blue means that it's not affected by a bone, whereas red means it is affected by a bone. And this should allow me to select the bones that I want it to be working with, but it doesn't want to do that right now. And forgive me because I haven't worked that much with weight paint in 2.8, so things may have changed. But essentially, I think if we go into pose mode and select this bone, oh, that didn't work either. Oh, here we go. So you need to look at the vertex groups over here to know what you're working with. I'm just going to reapply my automatic weights and see if that fixes anything. Yes, okay, so now it's working how I expected it to. I don't know what was going on before. I may have parented it incorrectly. However, this is how it should have worked before. So you can see that this bone that I have in my vertex group here is affecting this area with the red. And then if I move to bone 1, you can see the areas of effect on here. So now if I move it in pose mode, it'll do more what I was expecting. Perfect. That's more what I was expecting to happen. Again, I apologize for the little detour there. It was not expected in 2.8. I've had some issues with animation, but that's basically because I haven't done that much animation in 2.8. I've done a lot of modeling. So if we rotate these, you can see that you can twist it, rotate it on the X or the Y, and get those similar effects. Just like we did with the cube before, any of these bones can have their location, rotation, scale tracked. So if we go and select all our bones with A, and hit I, you can see it added 40 keyframes because it added keyframes for every bone. I'll scrub ahead to 30, and we'll just manipulate these a bit. We'll rotate this guy on the Y, maybe we'll rotate this guy on the X a bit, and then we'll rotate this guy on the Z. How about that? So we get a weird looking piece like that. Hit A to select all your bones, press I, it added 40 more keyframes. Now, if I want this to loop back so that it looks like this at frame 60, I can go to frame 1, where we currently have this, go to Pose, and copy pose. This will copy the pose of all the selected bones that you have. Then if I scrub ahead to 60, I can go back to Pose and paste pose, and then hit I again, and it adds those 40 keyframes. So now, if I go back to the beginning of the timeline, you can see that this will nice loop for me there, like that. So keep in mind that anything can be animated. This is something, if you're making a character, you're probably going to want a skeleton in it so that you can have different bones that control different parts of the character. You can have bones directly mapped to an object so that you can move that object as well. If the entire object is red, then all of the geometry will follow the rotation or orientation of that bone. So that is the basics of animation, I suppose. I can show you a few more things or tips and tricks that you may use in your projects. Down here on the timeline where it says playback, if you're previewing your animation and you have sound mapped to your animation as well, which is placeable in the video sequence editor. So in here you could place audio frames. We're not going to worry about that right now, but you can place audio sequence in there. It may get out of sync. As you can see, I'm running at 24 frames a second, which is what it should be running at. However, when you have a lot going on in your scene and you're trying to view this in real time to see what your animations might look like, sometimes it'll get a little bit off. Maybe it'll be running at 22 or 23, trying to keep up. But the audio will keep playing at the full 24 frames a second. So if we do what's called an AV sync right here, that will make sure that the animation will skip and drop those frames that it missed and keep up with the audio. So it won't be quite as fluid, but it won't crunch down your computer and make your audio look out of sync while previewing. Now, when rendering something, that's not an issue. It's only an issue in previewing. This is a major issue when you do something that's called baking audio to an F-curve. So essentially, you can import, let's go back to the animation window. You can import a audio file and we bake the sound to the F-curve, which is somewhere in here. And again, forgive me because I haven't done this in a while. If anybody is interested in that, please ask me because I can show you, but I don't know exactly where it is right now. I would have to look up where that is again. And then from there, it basically takes the animation data and maps it to, or it takes the sound data and maps it to an animation. So the movement of this bone would be going back and forth based on the certain frequency range that you would have described to take out of that audio sequence, and then it would move back and forth with the music. So it is a fairly simple task. I just have to remember where that is at. And it may be in the graph editor somewhere, because these are all F-curves. So if you're taking the sound, you're basically just baking that sound into the F-curve. yeah. If anybody has any questions on animation, feel free to reach out to me or ask. I know a lot about animation. It's not my biggest art style in Blender. I do a lot more modeling and materializing than I do animating. However, I do know quite a bit about it and can probably answer your questions if you do have them. And I hope that this was helpful. I know it was a bit fast, but it's good information that you may use in your project. So, thanks. Enjoy.